We have another victory to report in these cases trying to utilize the 14th Amendment to remove President Trump in his re-election efforts from the ballot, the primary ballot and the general election ballot. So if you did even write him in, your vote would not be counted. This latest win comes out of Michigan. We filed a major amicus brief. We represented Republican parties of 7 states, but it would only take one of these court cases. We'll watch that one in Colorado very closely to move it to the next level.
Look, the Colorado case, our team did a great job, let me say that, led by Jane Raskin. But I will say this also, that judge seemed pretty predetermined on where this was going to go, and she was going to rule in favor of the Secretary of State having the authority to remove the former president from the ballot. This sets a terrible electoral precedent. We would then take it to the Colorado Court of Appeals and ultimately to the Colorado Supreme Court. I actually think the Colorado case is the case that will end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. I think there will be one case that ends up at the U.S. Supreme Court, and it'll likely be the case where our side loses. If we win, I think the court's less likely to take it. If we lose, and a court decision stands that says, in essence, that a elected official or appointed official in some state, the Board of Elections or the supervisors or the Secretary of State, can remove a duly authorized presidential candidate on their own accord, would be a horrible precedent. I think we'd have an overwhelming victory at the Supreme Court. So I think Colorado, keep your eye on that one. That's the one I think is going to the Supreme Court.
You don't think it necessarily takes like a split because
I do not.
Because in Colorado, if they did it there, it would affect every other state's voting for. If you were voting for Donald Trump in a different state, it would affect your vote because your vote would be watered down. The judge, very clear, the Michigan court claims Judge James Redford said in his decision Tuesday that questions about Trump's role in the January 6th insurrection and whether it constitutionally bars him from returning to the White House should be addressed by elected representatives in Congress. It's a political question that should not be decided by the judicial branch. So we should not have judges decide, picking and choosing who gets to be on the ballot.
Exactly the right case. And, of course, no actions on insurrection as insurrection has been raised. There's been no charges on the Insurrection Act. There's been no allegations on that. So that's very, very interesting. Harry Hutchinson, our director of policy, law professor, has also reviewed the opinion. Professor Hutchinson, your view of what we have here.
First, it's up to the political parties.
Which, of course, it is. Right.
To decide the nominee for president. And so whether or not Trump is selected as the Republican Party nominee is highly contingent, the court suggests, on outside factors. How strong are his opponents, for instance? Third, whether or not a candidate is placed on a presidential primary ballot does not mean that the candidate is necessarily eligible for office. So in some respects, the court is deferring the decision with respect to the general election. Mm-hmm. And then fourth, if Donald Trump is indeed selected as the nominee, he must still win what? The general election.
Right.
That's a contingency. And fifth, even if Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies, and I think the judge doubts that, Congress still has the potential role of intervening to remove any disqualification.
The idea that a judge or a Secretary of State could make this call is outrageous. Now, I think we're going to get the contrary conclusion, though, Harry, in Colorado.
I think that is probably correct.
We're trying it right now. It's our team's
and
trying
I would
it,
also keep my eye on Michigan because as the general election looms, it would not surprise me if the Secretary of State actually does, in fact, intervene on behalf of these particular plaintiffs to remove Donald Trump from office.
You know, it's
and then narrow the window for an appeal of that particular decision.
Here's what I think is going to happen, Jordan. And I think the Colorado case is going to move very quickly because if the judge rules that he does not appear on the column, that they could remove him from the primary ballot. When's the Colorado primary? I think it's March.
Yeah, so you've got to start printing those ballots by the beginning of the year at least.
So that means you got to have a final adjudication before, a couple of weeks before, at least.
Oh, at least.
So I think it's conceivable that we have a case that's bouncing around the Supreme Court in January in Colorado. I think it's going to move that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, there's 28 of these actions across the country. right now, most of them are being dismissed pretty quickly. But this one in Colorado is moving forward very rapidly to conclusion at the district court level. I mean, this is the one we're going to see the first decision from a judge after a full trial. I mean, we saw, again, 2 have been dismissed. Michigan, actually 4 have been dismissed. New Hampshire, Michigan, Minnesota, and Florida. There's been voluntary dismissals by the plaintiffs in Maine, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Utah, and Idaho, but still pending Alaska, Montana, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, where we're in, New Mexico, Texas, Kansas, Wisconsin, South Carolina, of course, Virginia we've talked about, West Virginia we're involved in, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Delaware. So, I mean, there's still a lot of states at play here that have to come to a conclusion very soon so that the ballots for the primary are printed correctly.
We got a comment that came in on YouTube. It's a really poignant question, and that is this. I'm concerned that the Supreme Court won't take up the case, letting the states decide. So here's the question. I mean, it's a very good question. I think they have to take, if Trump wins and the Republican Party wins, that they put up whoever they want that meets the otherwise qualifications, I don't think the Supreme Court has to engage it because there's no harm at that point. But if, let's say, Colorado goes against us, which, again, is my thought that it probably does, I think, Harry, they have to take it. Because if not, it's going to affect that one state could have impact for the entire other 49 states.
And that is particularly true with respect to the primary process, because even if we're talking about a blue state jurisdiction, which is, let's say, more likely to select Biden in a general election, Trump has been affected, and the right of the voters in those blue states have been affected in helping to select the nominee, for instance, for the Republican Party.
This is interesting with Colorado. So the primary is March 5th. Is the 2024 Colorado presidential primary. But the military ballots have to be printed in early December in Colorado. So this thing really is on a short fuse. I mean, I think we're at the Supreme Court on that case in a matter of weeks, not months. I really do. I think that judge is going to rule by early December, and it'll go to the Colorado Court of Appeals, and they may sit on it. We may move for an expedited. They may do nothing. Then we may have to take it up on an emergency basis to the U.S. Supreme Court. I think that is the case to keep your eye on right now. I mean, Michigan, too. But is going to be Colorado because I think I'm expecting an adverse decision there. But overall, we're getting great decisions. But one state could impact the election significantly.
So that's why, again, this has to be ultimately decided. You can't have one state that's going to say, in this state, Donald Trump's not going to be counted, but in the other 49 states he is, because then he's automatically down a state, even in a situation where he might have won that state. That might be a state he could win. It's interesting. We just got this from the Colorado judge because we're in court right now in the hearing. The Colorado judge said she wanted it decided before Thanksgiving. So it should be decided next week, if not by the end of this week.
Well, it makes sense. If the ballots have to be printed early December for the military, I think, look, folks, so what does this mean? This means that in the middle of handling all of the issues we're handling at the United Nations and at the international courts on the Israel and negotiating for the hostage release, we've got a Supreme Court case that is simmering right now on low simmer, about to go to medium simmer, and probably by end of Thanksgiving, a full simmer.